Welcome to The Writing Life, the podcast for anyone who writes. My name is Steph.
And I'm Peggy.
And we are speaking to you from the National Centre for Writing, our home in the heart of Norwich, UNESCO's City of Literature. In today's episode, I met with novelist and essayist Matt Greene to discuss the process of writing his latest novel, The Definitions, a work of dystopian fiction which interrogates and plays with the relationship between language, memory, and the self. But before the main portion of today's episode, it's February and we've got lots coming up at NCW this month, haven't we, Peggy?
We certainly do, Steph. I can't believe it's already February.
I know.
Though.
We're barrelling through the year.
How can it be?
Oh, no. I've got so much I need to achieve. So much I haven't done already.
Both impossible, but also somehow feels like March already.
Yes.
Or April, do you know?
Yeah, it does, absolutely.
Wow.
What is time?
But what is even time? But yeah, there's loads happening here at good old NCW. February is bringing the East Anglian Book Awards, which is just a really special and important moment in our calendar year. But we'll be having a beautiful event on the 12th of February where we will be announcing the winner of the Book of the Year, among other things.
Yes.
So that's going to be lovely. We've got some events as part of the Norwich Science Festival. That's happening next week. And loads of cool stuff coming up there and across the city, actually, not just here.
Yeah.
Just loads of brilliant things exploring.
Yeah, lots of scientific questions and events for families and for adults and book events and, performance, all kinds of bits and pieces going on.
If memory serves, all kinds of kind of fun, creepy, crawly type stuff at the forum. Lots of, really hands-on participation stuff. So that'll be fun. And it's also National Storytelling Week, this from the 2nd to the 8th of Feb. And the theme for that this year is to soundtrack your story. So I think we're looking to explore what lyrics mean to us and what lyrics mean to you and which are your favourite and which stories do they tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, I listen to a lot of music, so I'm excited for that kind of like mashup between two things I love, stories and music. That's really cool.
Yeah. Can you read whilst listening to music or anything like that?
No. Or I kind of, it's sort of ambient, not lyrical
background
stuff.
Yes, maybe like a movie. I like movie scores. I can listen to movie scores.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of Lord of the Rings happening in our house sometimes when Wes is aiming for high drama. So,
Superb.
That sort of thing. But
happy. All right.
Let's move on to the main portion of today's episode and my conversation with Matt Greene. Matt is a novelist and essayist. His first novel, Ostrich, published in 2013, won a Betty Trask Award and was a Daily Telegraph Book of the Year. His memoir, Jewish, was published in 2020, and his latest novel, The Definitions, was published in October 2025. He lives in London with his partner and 2 sons.
The Definitions is an elegant and haunting dystopian novel about a group of individuals gathered to relearn how to navigate the world after a mysterious illness strips them of their memories. Matt spoke to Steph about the genesis of the novel, which began as a philosophical experiment, and how working within the dystopian genre allowed him to explore how language shapes identity. They also discussed his approach to writing characters who lack memory or a sense of self, and how their gradual understanding of the world was conveyed through a playful, vivid use of simile and metaphor.
Yeah, Matt was a wonderful guest. I really enjoyed talking to him. He had so many interesting things to say, and I loved this idea of wanting to experiment first, having this sort of philosophical experiment around language and how language is linked to memory and, our direct first-hand experiences, and using that as a jumping off point, and then the story kind of comes from that. So the story evolved from these sort of, ideas that he was tussling with. And he was also talked a bit about how observing his children grow up and the way that they are learning language, at home and in school and with their friends, how that sort of shaped the way he was writing this as well. So
fascinating when you think about it. Isn't it how we learn to speak or read? Kind of put it all together. It is really...
Absolutely. And a very, very clever bloke and very lovely too. So let's dive into my conversation with Matt Greene. So Matt, welcome to The Writing Life. It's a pleasure to speak with you today. How are you doing?
I'm all right. It's a thrill to be here. It's one of my favourite shows.
That's very kind of you. Well, we're very happy to have you here, and we're going to be discussing your writing journey and the craft behind your latest novel, The Definitions, which was published recently by Dead Ink Books. It's such a great read. It's so fascinating, such a fascinating interrogation of what happens when language and self and memory are sort of taken from us. So I'm looking forward to digging into it with you. Firstly, to start with, could you tell us a bit about your writing journey so far? When did you begin sort of taking writing seriously, as it were, and how has that path unfolded for you over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. I fell into writing in the way I think people fall into a lot of jobs. And then I looked around and realised, I guess this is what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote a play with a friend, one of my oldest friends, a very good writer called Darren Richmond. He's a writer and journalist, and him and another old friend of mine read a fantastic spoof autobiography of Pat Sharp a couple of years ago, which I'd highly recommend. We wrote a play when we were about 19 years old, and against all sense, we decided to do a short run at the Edinburgh Fringe with it. And we got a couple of reviews that compared it to a sitcom that we hadn't seen and didn't approve of, because we thought we were doing, Beckett, but, apparently we definitely weren't. And we were on the train back from Edinburgh when we got a call from the producer of this show asking if we had any London dates, which of course we did not, but of course we told them we did. And we ended up off the back of this with a sitcom commission. I think it was my first year of university. And we got paid £1,000 between us for an option to turn this play into a sitcom. And the mortifying thing that I can remember is I can remember going to one of my tutors who had an assignment due for, and sort of saying, I don't know if I'm going to get this assignment in on time. And they were like, oh, do you need an extension? And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be here much longer. I've got £500 now. So, I've got to, And we spent years out of university. I did thankfully finish my degree.
Good.
One good life decision in there.
Stuck with it, yeah.
Yeah, just about. And we spent the best part of our 20s working as screenwriters. And this was in the era where there was still, a little bit of money knocking about, and you could make a living of sorts, particularly if you still lived at home like I did. You could make something resembling a living developing TV ideas and films and never getting anything made. And I got very sick of that. And I wrote my first novel in my mid-20s, basically just to have something that I was in control of, something that had some interiority to it, and something that was complete in itself and wasn't waiting for someone to green light it to the tune of, a couple of £1 million. And then overnight, I guess, I became a novelist because it was a 2-book deal, and suddenly I had to, write another book, and then you're in it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've written across a few genres, you've fiction, memoir, several plays, as you mentioned. Have those different forms influenced each other in any way? Do they kind of knock into each other at all, or do they feel very separate? That's
a very good question. I guess I haven't really thought about that. The one thing I would say that they probably all have had in common, maybe I think up to and including the definitions, is that there's a comic sensibility to all of them to a degree that I think is maybe the binding twine between them. But no, I think quite often, certainly when it comes to writing a book, I always feel like you never know how many of them you're going to get to write in a lifetime, and it has to be something that animates you furiously for the year, 2, 3, 4 that you're going to be working on it. So I find that there's nothing particularly unifying in my work other than an obsession about some topic, or sometimes not even a topic, sometimes just a feeling that you want to mine down into. So I mean, in a sense, they're all quite separate, because I'm just obsessional about whichever project I'm working on, to the degree that I've forgotten anything previous and anything prospective. It's a bit of a waffly answer, but I guess it's an honest one. It's thinking out loud for you.
Absolutely, yeah, no, and yeah, interesting that you touch on the humour. I want to talk about that a bit later. But what was the gap between Ostrich, your first novel, and the definitions?
Oh, it was a cool 12 years.
Well, it takes a while, doesn't it? But you wrote a memoir in between that.
I wrote a memoir
as well,
and I think it's kind of maybe worth saying for the benefit of listeners, because I think probably a lot of your listeners are writers, right?
Yes.
I think this is my 9th book.
Wow.
So I think I know everyone, it's quite a common story for people to, not publish a couple of books and then publish their first novel, and their first novel is really the third or the fourth. For me, my first book was my first book, but I've written countless books since then.
Yeah.
Some of them are pretty good. Some of them are not so good.
Yeah.
Some of them, went through multiple drafts and came very close to finding homes and then didn't for whatever reason. But yeah, it's a long journey. And I think maybe it's one of those things where 20 years ago, a lot of those failures would have been more public. I'd have been writing and publishing, and people would have looked at that and gone like, well, this book doesn't quite work, but I can kind of see that he's moving in a direction that could be interesting in 2 or 3 books' time. And now we don't really have those books, I think, published. And I'm partly grateful for that from a point of view. But from a reader's point of view, I feel a bit impoverished because I enjoy seeing that process. I enjoy seeing someone figure it out in public.
Yeah, of course. And do the books that haven't been published, are they very much like cutting room floor, or are they, in a drawer somewhere and you're like, I might go back to that maybe one day?
I don't know. There's a couple I might go back to, but I don't know. I kind of feel like you've kind of got to change as a person to write a new book, and then it's very hard to go back to something because you don't even recognize the person that you were when you were trying to write it.
Yeah, I guess it's all part of the process, really, isn't it? And how did the experience of writing the definitions differ from working on your debut novel?
Oh, well, the main difference would be that I have 2 children now. So
yes, big difference, big change.
Again, that's the honest answer, is that my writing time is a lot more limited. And the definitions maybe stylistically reflects that. It is quite elliptical and it's very short. And that doesn't mean that it was a quick one to get down. There were far more logistical challenges this time round. I also think one of the interesting things about writing a first book versus writing everything after it is, I think when you're writing a first book, at least that's how it felt to me, like I didn't feel like I was making any choices. I felt like I was writing the only way I could to get something to book length. And a style and a voice, might organically come from that if you're lucky, and it might not. And, you might find yourself going through various different drafts and various different voices. But when you're a bit longer in the tooth and you've kind of honed something approaching a craft, I feel like you are very aware of the choices you're making. You're very aware that there's ways that you can render a scene, a chapter, a feeling, a metaphor, whatever it is. You are more aware of the multiplicity of options. And that can be simultaneously empowering because you have a toolkit that you can dip into, but also can be very stifling. The analysis paralysis of the various unrealized versions of a book you're writing. So the definitions, it was actually one of the things that was most appealing about it is that it had this huge formal constraint on it. So the characters in the definitions they've been stripped of all of their biographical memories. So what I wanted to do there's plenty of reasons from a philosophical point of view. I was interested in that. But one of the reasons that was particularly appealing from a craft point of view is you basically had to define characters without the traditional thing you would use to define characters, without these characters have no backstory whatsoever. So suddenly, I found that I'd narrowed down the options I could take a huge amount, enough to the degree that I could get from the start to the end.
Yeah. I'm so interested in how you've developed those characters, actually. So we'll definitely talk about that. Yeah, let's move on to the definitions and dig into it a bit more. For listeners who haven't picked it up yet, could you give a brief overview of the premise and the situation that your characters find themselves in?
Yeah.
Without giving too much away.
Well, this is definitely something I should be better at by now, but I'll give it a stab. So the definitions follows a cohort of people who've woken up in a seaside rehabilitation clinic after contracting a virus that has stripped them essentially of their identities. They are amnesiac. Amnesiac? Can you use that as an adjective?
I think so.
Well, thank you.
Sounds right to me.
Well, that's very generous of you. So let's go with that. And they're aphasic to begin with. And they're told that they're going to be housed in this facility while they convalesce and while their memories return to them. And what becomes apparent to the reader, if not to the characters fairly early on, is that this rehabilitation clinic is perhaps more of a re-education centre. and they're being prepared to re-enter some version of an outside world that we are not party to. And as matriculants in this centre, they are offered a choice of courses that are tailored to them specifically, that will help them, prepare them for that reintegration into society. And for me, it's kind of about, well, it's about a lot of things, but I think it's about the way that we construct selfhood through memory, and the way that those things can be manipulated. But it's also reckons with something that I think all art, not to be too grandiose, reckons with, which is the limits of language. And the ways that I think all art is implicitly kind of grappling with that. And this is kind of explicitly exploring the ways that language can bypass thought, and it can encode division, but at the same time, how it can offer us, maybe more than anything, a shot at a deeper human connection that can take us out of those situations. So the package deal of language, I suppose.
That was a brilliant elevator pitch, I have to say. That was very good. If we go back to when you first started writing this book, because it is a brilliant sort of dystopian premise, I guess. You mentioned this sort of philosophical experiment, and I think I'd read in a Q&A that you'd approached parts of it almost like an experiment. Could you talk a bit more what that meant in practice? Was that the sort of, did the sense of experimentation or the testing of ideas come to you first and the story followed?
Yeah, I think it probably is fair to say that. So the book is written in retrospect. There's a character reflecting on their experiences after their admission to the centre. There is a version of this book where they were aphasic for the first section of this book, which was, I think I can say this, completely unreadable. And I was very committed to it. And I gave months of my life to trying to make this work, because I thought that it was valid and interesting and exciting in a way that was kind of getting me to my desk. But I think it was probably quite punishing for the reader. And there's probably some of that in there still, but one of the experiments was figuring out the vantage from which this could be told from, figuring out the opportunities in approaching it that way, as opposed to offering it as a retrospective. I'm always drawn to books that offer a retrospective view on something, particularly in the first person. I love the idea that the narrator and the character they are narrating are separated by a distance of years, and they are therefore able to achieve, very far from an objectivity, but a vantage on those experiences that you're not party to if you're living through them in that moment. So that ended up being something that did become absolutely elemental to the story as well. In truth, it's quite hard, if we're being honest, isn't it, to sort of like figure out what comes first, because often the story comes from the experimentation, and often the experimentation comes from trying to make something work on a narrative level too. But that's why I'm always drawn to books that have a thematic centre and something that they're exploring philosophically that will work as the gravitational hold on those story elements.
Yeah. It's really interesting to hear your process and how, there was a version of this that first came out that you were obsessing about, as you say. There is the version that you feel really beholden to and that you're in love with, and you're like, this will work. But sometimes you have to kind of go back and think, actually, where does this great idea, this experimentation sort of stop, and where does the storytelling take over, or where is my reader in this, I guess, because there's the process of writing it and loving it as a writer, but also, do you want this to be, what will the reader find from this, or what will they get out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, I guess that's where we get into the enormous difference between writing a book and publishing a book. And when, like me, you've written more books that have not been published than have been published, you do, and I think it's a great freedom, you do really forget about the reader to some degree. And I think that can probably be dangerous. It can lead you to writing, 50 pages of a completely aphasic narrator, rediscovering language through the process of simile, which thrilling to me. It was great fun.
Yeah, I could tell, you could tell.
But yeah, I think there is also a great freedom in knowing that I think you have a duty to the ideas at the heart of the book before you have a duty to the reader. I think the second you start thinking of the reader as someone you're trying to accommodate, then I think you run up against the very immediate problem of you don't know who that person is or if they even exist, and you're on a hiding to nothing trying to accommodate them into your work, I think.
Yeah, it's the eternal struggle, isn't it? I've met many writers who are, sort of driving themselves slowly crazy, trying to second guess what the reader or the publisher or anyone will think, and then others that just say, screw it, I don't care.
Yeah. I think I've definitely progressed from being in the former camp to the latter camp.
Yeah, there's a great middle ground, isn't there? Absolutely. So this book is described as a dystopian novel. What's your relationship to dystopian fiction? How did working within that genre sort of shape did it shape what you were able to explore in the book? Did you set out to think this is going to be, broadly a dystopian sort of genre story?
Not at all, and that's in no way intended as revealing anything of my feelings about dystopian literature, which I really enjoy. But I just think when you call something dystopian fiction or anything really, there's kind of like a metafiction here that when we talk about a book that has come out, like there's an expectation we'll talk about it like it was a linear process, and I set out to do this, and here's the thing that I set out to do. And the truth is, for me, like whenever I'm writing anything, it comes from a feeling of, some sort of dysphoria, usually. There's something that maybe is pre-verbal, that I cannot articulate in another way. And I want to mine down into that feeling, and I'm prepared to do that for a couple of years. And that is very, very far removed from like the decision of writing in or out of a genre. I think we're in a really interesting place now with genre. I think to a degree there's the kind of exploding of the boundaries between genres. I think that's very exciting from a reader's point of view. But I think simultaneous to that, we've got kind of a supercharging of genre because we've got services like Amazon who want to sell us a subscription to something rather than an actual product. So
it's a very marketable thing, isn't it, genre? It's
Yes, particularly when it's sort of reduced to something replicable. And I think that is very much something that suits a consumption kind of idea of literature, that you can have something so specifically pitched to you and as a pipeline that can be delivered straight to a device that you've got in your household. So I don't know. I guess like in some ways we've become a lot less snobbish and understanding about genre being the place where a lot of the most exciting experimental stuff is happening. At the same time, we've also kind of got this marketization force that is reducing something to its most replicable traits. Sorry, that wasn't really an answer. That was more of a rant about the state of the market.
No, it's fascinating. It's really, it's useful to hear. Sort of an inside take on how you feel about these things. And do you find it frustrating if something you've written is marketed as a specific thing? Does it kind of, you're not bothered either way? Is it?
I'd like to say I'm really not bothered because I really do feel that it's none of my business. Like, I kind of feel like the publication is so separate to the writing, and a book has to belong to readers, and they have to come to it some way, and that's the marketer's job, and they mostly know what they're doing. And I'm very grateful for anyone putting the time and effort that they're putting in to try and get the book in front of people. But I don't know. I mean, obviously, in a perfect world, everything would be accepted as its own thing, and we wouldn't have to play this game. And I definitely I had more of an issue, I think, with my first book. My first book has a preteen narrator, but it's definitely not a YA book, and it got marketed in the States very much as a YA book. And I still get angry emails from middle school librarians who have mistakenly bought copies for their year 7 class. And I can't help feel that they have a very legitimate grievance, but I kind of like to think it's not with me. So
of course, it's out of your hands, isn't it? A kind of marketing mistake, as it were. Well, let's talk about the sort of the world that your characters inhabit here, because we have, rather than relying on sort of, heavily or quite detailed world building, in the definitions, the world feels more ambiguous. There's, we get these hints. There's some information that we can kind of glean throughout, like the virus attacks only episodic memory, or there's a hint that dogs don't exist anymore, or there's been this massive data breach in the outside world. Could you talk a bit about your decision to keep the setting more open and ambiguous rather than quite specific?
Yeah, well, the feeling was that if these characters were in a dystopia, they absolutely wouldn't know that, because their scope of experience is limited, as everyone's is. Theirs more specifically than anyone else, I suppose, because they are having to take on faith the official story that is being given to them about their situation. So for me, what was most interesting and what the characters would want to mine down into and explore is not so much a world outside the perimeter of this facility, because that's just meaningless to them in the way that, life outside of, the mile and a half radius we live is meaningless to my 3-year-old. It's not something he needs to conceptualize or has the ability to conceptualize. But what is fascinating to them are the minutiae of this world that they are in and the mysteries that may lie underneath it. And for the narrator and for one of the other characters, Chino, this mostly exists on a verbal level. They're mostly fascinated with the distinctions between words that they're learning in their classes, and the disquieting understanding that the boundaries between these words cannot be truly defined in a categorical way. So it's not that I wasn't interested in what was happening outside the centre, is that I just didn't really I couldn't find a way that the characters would be particularly interested in that. Their world is as big as their world is, and it's more than full enough for them to occupy every thought they have every day, for every second of the day. So it didn't feel particularly faithful to their situation to even worry about defining the world outside of this facility.
Yeah, logically, that makes absolute sense. You mentioned your children. Did having children and observing your children impact this novel at all, and the way that you shaped, the characters? Yeah.
So the context for this novel, I started writing this when our eldest son, who's about to turn 9, when he had just started school, and he had not previously been in any form of childcare at all. He'd been at home with me and my partner. We were sort of making that balance work, and then we had the pandemic, and he was completely at home with us. So he'd never been in childcare, and then suddenly he was being inducted into an institution, and it's a very nice school. We're very lucky, but it is his first exposure to existing inside this institutional world that has a set of rules and a set of expectations, some of which that are made explicitly clear to him. These are the rules of the school. You wear this, you don't do this in class, you sit down at the desk. But a lot of them are assiduously policed by peers, but are not ever explicitly stated. And the thing that I've seen with him, but not just with him, the thing that I remember is how much of your path through school and life after that is determined by your ability to internalize these behavioral norms that are never explicitly presented to you as standards that need to be met. And it's fascinating watching that happen from a process of reception to year 4, which he's in now, seeing how rigid and particular the social hierarchies have become, and knowing that it's a very different thing to sit outside of that and be desperately wanting to relive it on their behalf and guide them through it, but knowing you can't really. So the best you can do is observe it and try and provide some guidance that way. But yeah, the book has definitely been informed by that. And the big appeal, or one of the big appeals to the premise for me, is having adult characters who've been literally infantilized through a process of being stripped of their, having their entire personalities wiped clean, essentially. that gave the opportunity to cover like a metaphorical childhood and metaphorical adolescence and a metaphorical adulthood in a condensed time frame that was very appealing and definitely is informed by being a parent, I think.
Yeah. And when you are writing characters that are adults that have no real sense of self or past to draw from, you touched on this earlier, but how do you bring them fully to life for the reader then? Was that a challenge for you?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that was the challenge, I'd say. But I think the starting point, well, maybe not the starting point, but a couple of steps after the starting point becomes, well, if they don't know anything about their personalities and their lives and who they are, then how am I going to make them distinct from one another? What's going to be the thing that distinguishes them before they've been socialized and their personalities reform in that way? That seems like quite a sort of a large problem. But the second you've got a second child, you recognize that, like, oh, right, no, these are two completely different people, almost no correlation to one another, and you're shocked every day by the difference between them. And that is not because they have different backstories or different contexts. There are things that are so intrinsic to these characters that they completely predate the need for memory retrieval. And also one of the things that was quite exciting for me to sort of play around with was the idea that there might be some residual memory held in their bodies, something that doesn't exist on a mental level at all, but something that has been just compacted down into their actual self in a way that informs some element of them. So Chino, for example, is always stooping when he goes into rooms because he's been told that he's taller than he is. He's used to, at some point in his past, he's internalized this. And I think for me, one of the biggest challenges, but the biggest excitements about this was seeing the ways they would each respond to the situation they were in, the ways that they would either assimilate to the expectations and recognize the expectations that they were co-creating themselves, or whether they would actively reject that or just fail to recognize them. And I think in the three main characters, there's Maria, who has a kind of genius for assimilation, which sets her on a very different course to the other two. And in Chino, there's an intellectual curiosity and kind of ideological objection to their containment that forces him in a very different situation. And then the narrator themselves, I would say they occupy an observer position between these two poles, and they are completely unable to articulate to themselves why they have this sense of dysphoria, which I think is something that doesn't require a dystopian or a speculative setting for hopefully people to relate to. And therefore, for the narrator, it's the articulation itself becomes the prize. If they can articulate something, if they can capture their experience in that way, they will have in some way transcended their situation and gained a mastery over it. And I think the book is really their attempt to do that. And I won't say whether it's successful or not. Maybe someone might read it. That'd be nice.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, yeah, I want to sort of dig into that articulation and that use of language a bit more. But just quickly, it had occurred to me, I was just thinking when you mentioned the narrator, maybe it's just me, but I didn't realise until about 100 pages in that I had sort of weirdly assumed that the narrator was male until hints suggested otherwise. Was that like was that vagueness intentional? Is that more a reflection of me and, individual, what I bring to it? And I guess more broadly then, what role does gender play in the novel?
Yeah, no, it plays a very big role, absolutely. And you're definitely not the only person who's had that experience. And I'm pleased to hear that. So language essentially is a system of categorization, and that categorization relies on binaries. It relies on us. In the book, it's, these two characters are desperately trying to define the difference between a bench and a chair, and they're unable to do so. You can do it with anything in life. When does a cup become a mug? What's the difference between those two things? these are not the most incendiary binaries of our time. There is one binary in particular that people are incredibly committed to policing to a fanatical degree, to the degree that they are more than happy to deny people's existence. And that's obviously gender. And without giving too much away about the trajectory of the book, I think the narrator does not fit in that binary that is very strictly policed in this centre. And I think outside of this centre, outside of the world of the book, I think it's one of the most insane things to me that people are so keen to police this. Yeah, to the degree that they'll absolutely trample over people's rights to just their rights. So yeah, that was a very key thing to me. It felt like the area where I could most explore the idea that language offers you a choice of dichotomies often, and this choice is often arbitrary. There's, if we've got a minute to talk about it, there's like I teach to make my living rather than write. Shockingly, when you have 7 unpublished books, believe it or not. So one thing that I love to do is I love to do an exercise with older classes where we try and define the difference between a mug and a cup. And I'll show them a series of receptacles and we will define them in certain ways. And there's always some point of conflict. Someone has decided that this ceramic cup that doesn't have a handle is a mug because it can sustain temperatures of this heat. And there's always a debate about it. And it's very interesting to me that when you ask someone why something is a something, they will immediately have this very eloquent and very strongly held view that they're able to trot out, and it will appear to be like an infallible intellectual argument. But it's always post hoc. It's never came from they never looked at the thing, had the argument, and then said this is a mug because of this. It's more like you've had to
justify. Yep.
Exactly. There's a retconning going on here. Because the truth is, a mug is a mug if it's close enough to the picture I have of a mug in my head, and a cup is a cup if it's close enough to the picture of a cup I have in my head. And I think that post hoc intellectualizing that people get very, very invested in is something we see an awful lot in gender policing. And the truth is, I just think people have a very narrow idea in their head of what one thing is and what another thing is, and they just based on rule things in or out based on proximity to that image, which is completely arbitrary. But yeah, I think that the process of that happening is fascinating to me. It's a big part of the book. Yeah.
It's a knotty thing to unpick, isn't it? And you could, as you say, you could argue about it forever. But the novel also has a wonderfully vivid and playful use of language and use of simile and metaphor in particular. So, blades pressed together like the beaks of seabirds and all of these kinds of things, which are, beautiful. There's something about a spongy word, the shape of foods like soup and cake and things like that. Could you talk a bit about your process for creating these images and how they kind of, they function in the narration? It feels like they were a lot of fun to kind of play around with.
Fun. They definitely were. And thank you very much. That's a very generous question. I'm pleased you liked those and picked those out. I mean, maybe this is a bit of an overreach, and this is the part where I'll reveal my intention, and my intention will be completely irrelevant. But I wanted to write something beautiful. I wanted the book to be beautiful, and I wanted it to be beautiful in a way that a child reckoning with the world can be very beautiful before everything has sunk down on to a level of being discounted. So that was a very exciting thing about having characters for whom everything is a novelty. It did give the opportunity, as they fought their way through their aphasia, for them to define the world through simile and through metaphor in a way that I think we all do. I think there's a mistake in viewing metaphor and simile as a purely literary device as opposed to something cognitive and completely essential. I've got a very, very low level grounding in linguistics, and remember reading a fascinating book called Metaphors We Live by George Lakoff, I think it was, when I was going to say my undergraduate degree. I've only got one degree. My degree. So when I was studying that back a couple of lifetimes ago, and what that book posits is that it is through the process of metaphor that we understand everything around us. Everything is comparative, and we're constantly making a web of associations between known entities and unknown entities to help make sense of the world. And I wanted to do that explicitly and to have these characters reckon with that, on a direct level.
Yeah, I love that idea of them kind of feeling things out for the first time and finding ways to describe something in a new way. And some of those similes, absolutely make sense when you read them and you think, yes, that is, that's a beautiful way of describing something. And then others, you're like, that's a strange way of thinking about it, isn't it? But that's absolutely the way it would be. It's all in the eye of the beholder as well. So there are some comparisons that others would think like that. Yeah, never thought of it like that. That's a bit odd.
There's also the thing that it's nice to make a feature of, which is that I'm always sleep deprived these days. And when I'm sleep deprived, I find that what's called my language performance just drops off a cliff. And that means there's very basic words that I find myself unable to retrieve a lot. So I think sometimes when I'm writing, I feel like at least half of my metaphors or similes are because I just couldn't think of the word that I meant. And I had to go around the houses to get there. And sometimes that can lead to something being completely convoluted and will end up on the cutting room floor. And sometimes it can bring you to that interesting place that you wouldn't have got to otherwise.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting experiment in itself, isn't it? You can say that part of your writing process is being sleep deprived and seeing what happens with it.
Yeah, that's my sensibility, and that's what I look for in a reader. I want sleep deprived readers. Yeah.
It's difficult to talk about language nowadays without talking about the big AI word, but it did occur to me, does the rise of AI and the use of AI, did that influence your were you thinking about that when writing the definitions?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got an essay coming out in a couple of weeks about this, and I'm going to try not to just launch straight into pontificating mode. But I think just a couple of things I would say. I hate it, really hate it. I see absolutely no benefit to outsourcing the most essential parts of being human. The thing that I think of is I am going to steal a little bit from the essay that's coming out. So there's a little bit of self-plagiarism coming up. So if this sounds more articulate than the rest of what I've babbled away at, then that's why.
Well, it's great promotion, isn't it, for your essays? People read it.
I think probably, I don't know what's going to come out first, this or that. So anyway, a bit cross-pollination. But there's a joke that I absolutely love that I do find myself thinking of a lot recently, which is there's two fishermen on a jetty and they're looking out over this lake, and one of them says, "Boy, that sure is a lot of water." And the other says, "Yeah, and that's just the top of it." And it feels to me like the premise of large language models and the proponents of AI, people pushing it into these arenas of our life, is what if it wasn't? What if a lake could just be the surface of a lake? What if we could do away with the entire ecology underneath that? What if instead of it being a habitat that supports life, because we are, language animals who live in language, what if it could just be this reflective surface? Wouldn't that be way better and way more efficient? No one would actually have to communicate with one another, and there'd be no need for language to actually mean anything. We could completely uncouple it from meaning. I think why that completely sociopathic view appeals to people is because language in itself is a surface. Language is always the surface. That's always what we're meeting each other with. And underneath that is all the failed attempts at articulation and the intention, that what you're dredging up from your soul to try and communicate to someone. And, on the best day, you may be doing about 80% of that. And if they're understanding 80% of what you're saying, then maybe 64% of your intention gets conveyed. But that's not really the point. The point is that you've tried and that someone has tried to understand you. And it's in that process of sort of, striving to understand one another that we are human, that's the base. So if you just have language that is only interested in its own plausibility, has no intention beneath passing as language, then I think it's an actual affront to I can't remember what a Studio Ghibli guy said about AI. I think he said it's an affront to life itself. And I do kind of completely agree with that. It horrifies me that we've got to a point where we're accelerating the emptying of language. It feels just like draining any other resource to me. If we can just drain the meaning away from this, And I think that suits people because we live in an age where it very much suits our politicians and our advertisers, who are one and the same, to it allows them to say whatever they want without meaning anything. And no one can critique you if you don't actually mean anything. It's so slippery and amorphous and meaningless, even when it has real life consequences, that it can't be policed and it can't be, So I don't know, that wasn't that much more articulate than what I've been babbling away at previously. But yeah, that was definitely part of what was informing this book, is an absolute terror of the direction that we seem to be speeding towards.
Well, I hope people go and read your essay about it. Where is that being published?
And that's coming out on LitHub in a couple.
Oh, excellent.
Side with the US publication. So I think first week of December, I think.
Oh, well, then we should be able to link to that then in the show notes, which would be, fantastic extra reading for everyone once they've read the definitions. Well, finally, on the book, we'd sort of touched on this very briefly before. There are some very dark moments in this book, particularly, towards the end. I don't want to give anything away, but there's some moments that really leave a strong impression. But at the same time, the novel is full of playful wit, and you mentioned sort of humour. What role do you see humour playing in this book and also in your work sort of more generally?
I think I'm a great believer that all humour is gallows humour to some degree. And maybe as a corollary to that, all gallows are to some degree humour, full of humour, at least in the sense of, how the hell did we get here? So I think comedy is one of those things that I've always grown up with the understanding that comedy offers a form. Comedy is often kind of absent from what we think of as realist art in a way that I find quite jarring, because comedy is the most realist of all the impulses, really. I mean, if you ever read Viktor Frankl on surviving Auschwitz, he dedicates a huge amount of Man's Search to Meaning to the importance of humour and comedy as I think he talks about it as a skill learnt in mastering the art of living, and something that allows him to coexist with between two completely incompatible positions. When you treat something with a degree of humour, it can be as a swerve, it can be to sort of not engage with the seriousness at its core, but it can also, I think, allow you to access that core in a way that you can't if you approach it from a different angle. I quite often have my writing described as sort of darkly comic or things, and I'm not trying to be dark.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to, or it's just, I don't know. I guess that's what humor is it allows you to occupy a space that you can't otherwise occupy, and it allows you to do that from not so much a position of safety, but it allows you to straddle two worlds, I think. I don't know. Is that what I think? I think that's what I think. Yeah.
Well, I could ask you many, many more things, and I had many more questions, but I will wrap things up there and implore people to go and read the definitions if they haven't already, because I think it's fantastic, and for such a small book, it packs a real punch, and it is I mean, I haven't written any books, but it's a real challenge. I think I always think with things like novellas and short stories that actually you've really got your work cut out for you there, because you really have to nail it, I guess, in a small space. So I definitely recommend people go and read it. What's next for you after you've got your LitHub essay coming out? Have you got any other books in the works?
Yes, I am completely allergic to building a coherent career, so I'm writing something completely different to this. I'm writing a multi-generational family saga at the minute.
Oh, wow.
Currently about 600 pages long. And I don't know how long we've got to, but maybe I could tell you a little bit about it if you like.
Of course, please do.
So I wrote a memoir, as you mentioned, it's sort of like a memoir and sort of social commentary about contemporary Jewish secular identity. And pretty much immediately after that came out, I was approached by a publisher asking if I wanted to do a sensitivity read on, I won't say the name, on a new novel by a very successful historical fiction author who sets their books in concentration camps. And I explained to them that I wasn't a Holocaust scholar. And they said, that's fine. And that's fine. We know you're not a Holocaust scholar. And, they didn't say this, but like, I was just a Jew who they wanted a Jew. They wanted some Jewish guy who's just published a book to offer a sensitivity read to say, yep, this book's fine. There's nothing wrong with this. And I couldn't take that job because I just disagreed with the entire project of that form of literature, where we treat the Holocaust as a backdrop and we aestheticize it, and weirdly, I think we gentrified it. I think when you look at all the candle maker of Treblinka and all this kind of stuff, like suddenly it starts to sound like it's sounding like Dalston or something. It's suddenly, there's a thriving job market in these in these concentration camps, if you were to believe the titles of this literature. So rather than just get angrier and angrier and angrier, which I did do for a while, I wanted to write something that would be something that treated the Holocaust as a living subject and never tried to fictionalize the camps, because I think that is a very irresponsible thing to be doing right now when we are moving from first generation survivors who have testimony that they can share to second and third generation testimonies. So I really don't think now is the time to be muddying the historical record on that. So I'm trying to write this massive multi-generational family saga that deals with the Holocaust as a living subject, and that is set in the aftermath of the death of this grandfather who was in Auschwitz and never talked about his experiences. And the book will never try and synthesize those experiences, but will try and illustrate and dramatize the ways in which those experiences, while never shared, have been the animating force in generations of his family's life after that. And God knows if I'll ever finish it, but that's what's happening at the minute.
So that's a work in progress at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds very meaningful. Another obsession for you, no doubt. But yeah, brilliant. Well, I hope we can read it.
Oh, well, so do I. Yeah, I really do. But one thing at a time. Let's the essay first. But yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fantastic to chat with you. And are you on social media? Can people find you anywhere?
Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky. I'm a real Matt Greene on Blue Sky. And I just joined Instagram. And
congratulations.
Oh my God. I'll be leaving Instagram pretty soon after this, after I've done the necessary degree of shameless plugging for this book, I think. So,
of course. Yeah, it's part of the job description, really, isn't it? For a time.
Yeah, afraid so.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much.
A big thank you to Matt Greene and to Steph for their time. Make sure to pick up a copy of the definitions from your local library or bookshop. If you've any questions, or you want to get in touch, or you want to tell us about your favourite lyrics, you can find us at Writer Centre on Instagram and Blue Sky. We're on Facebook, and you can sign up to the NCW newsletter at nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk.
As a UK registered charity, we rely on the generosity of our supporters to make our work possible. You can make a donation on our website by going to the Support Us page.
If you enjoyed what you heard today, please do consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving a rating and a lovely review, because this helps other writers to find us.
Thanks again. Keep writing, and we will catch you on the next episode.